The word cosmos is a Greek word that refers to everything that exists, the universe itself and everything in it. The cosmological argument for the existence of God tries to show that because anything exists, there must be a God who brought it into existence. In other words, without God to create it, nothing would or could exist. It's possible for God to exist without the universe, but it's not possible for the universe to exist without God. Thus, the cosmological argument tries to show that the universe is not a necessary being. This means that the universe relies on something for its existence. It's contingent and therefore cannot account for its own existence. The goal of the argument is to show that the universe was caused by an agent that is not part of the universe, has no cause itself, and is personal. There are several kinds of philosophical cosmological arguments, but we'll focus on what is called the Kalam argument because of its forcefulness and because understanding it often helps understand the others. The Kalam argument tries to show that the universe is not eternal, that it had to have a beginning, and that the beginning was caused by a person. Although this argument was first formulated by Christian philosophers, it was not until the medieval Islamic thinkers devoted attention to the argument that it found its full force. Kalam is an Arabic word that can be translated talk or speech, though it means something closer to philosophy or theology. The argument hinges on three sets of alternatives. The universe either began or had no beginning, either it was caused or uncaused, and if it was caused, the cause was either personal or impersonal. At the core of the argument is an understanding of the difference between a potential infinite and an actual infinite. Potential infinites are sets of numbers that are continually increasing by adding another number to the series. For example, the seconds on this counter are potentially infinite. Once the count began, a set of numbers was generated and will increase until we move on to the next point. If we never move on, the seconds will potentially accrue forever. But no matter how long we let it sit here and add up, the number will never get so big that it turns infinite. There will always be a finite number that we can add another increment to. Actual infinites are sets of numbers to which no increment can be added, since by nature of their infiniteness, the set includes all numbers. There's nothing to add. If this is hard to imagine, there's good reason. Actual infinites do not exist and cannot exist in the physical world. If actual infinites did exist in the physical world, we would see absurdities and effects we literally could not live with. For example, here we see the Earth rotating around the Sun and the Moon rotating around the Earth. Which is happening more often, the Moon going around the Earth or the Earth going around the Sun? Clearly the Moon makes more rotations around the Earth. Now, if the universe was infinitely old, which would make more rotations, the Moon or the Earth? The answer is that they would be equal. They would both have made an infinite amount of rotations. Even though the Moon has made 12 times the number of rotations of the Earth, they've made the same amount. It's an absurdity that cannot exist in reality. Or let's say you had a CD collection that was infinitely large, and each CD had an infinite number of songs on it. If you listened to one CD, you would hear as much music as if you'd listened to all of the CDs, an infinite amount. And yet those infinities are of different sizes, a nonsensical notion. Let's say there were only two artists in your CD collection, Bach and the Beatles, and that every other CD was by the Beatles. This would mean that you had as many Beatles CDs as you would Beatles and Bach CDs combined. They would both be an infinite number. And would the number of Beatles CDs be odd or even? It must be one or the other, but to speak of infinity in such a way is irrational. If this makes your brain hurt or is confusing at all, then you're beginning to understand why actual infinities do not exist in the real world. The examples are not just interesting brain teasers or puzzles. The fact that if x equals y, then x cannot also be 12 times greater than y is extremely important. You would never want to cross a bridge, ride in a car, or live in a house designed by an engineer who didn't recognize or didn't care about the absurdities of actual infinites. This demonstration of the non-existence of actual infinites is important to us in two real-world areas, time and causality. The best way to show that time is not infinite, that it had a beginning, is to observe that there is a now. If now exists, then time cannot be infinite. To show this, picture the moment now as a destination, like a train station. Then picture time as train tracks that are infinitely long. If you were a passenger waiting on the train to arrive, how long would you have to wait? The answer is forever. You can never reach the end of infinity. Thus, infinitely long train tracks cannot ever be crossed. There is no end to arrive at, no station. If infinitely long train tracks could be crossed, they would be the equivalent of a one-ended stick, a nonsensical notion. In fact, this is the opposite limitation of potential infinites. Just as potential infinites are finite numbers that could never turn infinite, actual infinites could never reach the end of their infiniteness and turn finite. But there is an end, and now the train did arrive at the station. This means the tracks of time cannot be infinitely long. There cannot be an infinite number of preceding moments prior to the present moment. The past is not an actual infinite. Thus, the universe had to have a beginning. The universe, however, did not cause itself to spring into existence. If it had a beginning, something began it. This is where causality comes into the picture. There is no such thing as an effect that was not caused. You are an effect of the biological process caused by your parents. These words you now hear were caused by my using my voice. The current state of the universe is an effect caused by various astronomical and physical conditions. But notice that each of the causes mentioned are also effects. For example, your parents are not only your cause, but they are the effects of their parents, who were the effects of their parents, and so on. But, as the non-existence of actual infinites shows, the chain of causes cannot regress forever. The train station in this case is made of present causes. Because we have causes now, there must have been a beginning to the sequence. Thus, there must be a cause that is not an effect, an uncaused cause, or first cause. Since the universe had a beginning and is an effect, it must have a cause itself. At this point, there are only two options. Either the cause was personal or it was impersonal. Let's think about what this uncaused cause would look like. The first cause would be non-contingent, meaning that its existence depends on nothing but itself. If it was contingent, then it would simply be one more effect in the chain of causes and effects. It must also be transcendent. This means that the cause of the universe must exist outside of and apart from the universe. And because this being exists apart from the universe, it must be immaterial. If it was material, then it would be part of the universe. The first cause would have to have the power to create the universe. Without this ability, nothing could be created. But these things are not enough to bring the universe into existence. There also needs to be a desire to create, a will to make the universe. Without this will to create, nothing would be created because the power to create could not be acted on. Now add all these things together. What kind of thing relies on nothing for its existence, exists apart from the universe, is immaterial, has the power to create something from nothing, and a will to do it or not to do it? Does this sound like a personal or impersonal being? Personal, of course. The ability to will is an attribute that belongs only to persons. Thus, the Kalam argument brings us to the conclusion that the universe had a beginning that was caused by a personal, powerful, transcendent, self-existing, immaterial being. In other words, God.